I need to tell you something before we begin. This story did not happen. Not exactly as I am about to tell it. The details, the dialogue, the specific moments I will describe, these come from imagination, from research, from piecing together fragments of legend and rumor into something whole. Bruce Lee did demonstrate his skills to military personnel on several occasions. He did leave soldiers and commanders speechless with what he could do. But this particular story, this specific encounter, is my creation. It is fiction built on a foundation of truth. And yet, I want you to stay with me, because even though this story did not happen in the way I will tell it, I believe it captures something real. Something about who Bruce Lee was, what he represented, and why his legend continues to grow more than 50 years after his death. Sometimes fiction can reveal truth more clearly than facts alone. Sometimes the stories we imagine tell us more about a person than the stories we document. So here is my invitation to you. For the next 20 minutes, let go of the need to verify. Let go of the historian's skepticism. Allow yourself to be transported to a military base in the Philippines in 1971, where 1,000 elite soldiers are about to witness something that will change their understanding of what the human body can achieve. Close your eyes for a moment if you can. Take a breath. And come with me. The sun rose over Fort Magsaysay like a wound opening in the sky, red and angry and impossibly bright. The largest military reservation in the Philippines sprawled across nearly 90,000 hectares of jungle and grassland, a landscape that had trained generations of soldiers for combat in Southeast Asia. On this particular morning, the air was already thick with humidity, the kind of wet heat that soaked through uniforms and made every movement feel like swimming through warm water. Somewhere in the distance, artillery practice sent dull thunder rolling across the hills. Closer, in the vast parade ground at the center of the base, 1,000 men stood in perfect formation, waiting. They were the elite, drawn from special forces units across the Philippines, Thailand, South Korea, and the United States. They had gathered for a joint training exercise that would last 3 weeks. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were the ones sent when ordinary soldiers failed. They were experts in hand-to-hand combat, in silent killing, in the kind of close-quarters violence that decided wars in jungles and alleys and rooms where there was no space to miss. Each of them had killed with their hands. Each of them believed they understood what the human body could do in combat. They were about to discover they were wrong. I want you to imagine standing among them. Feel the heat pressing against your skin. Smell the mixture of gun oil and sweat and jungle vegetation that defines every military base in the tropics. Hear the rustle of 1,000 men breathing, shifting their weight, waiting for something they do not yet understand. You are there. You are one of them. And you have no idea that the next few minutes will replay in your memory for the rest of your life. The commanding officer of the exercise was Colonel Ramon Delgado, a man whose reputation preceded him like a shadow. He had fought in Korea as a young lieutenant, had advised American forces in Vietnam, had built the Philippine Special Forces into one of the most respected units in Asia. His face was a map of scar tissue and hard decisions, and his eyes held the flat calm of someone who had seen everything combat could offer and had stopped being impressed long ago. He stood at the front of the formation, his posture perfect despite his 60 years, watching the entrance to the parade ground with an expression that might have been curiosity or might have been skepticism. Beside him stood a younger American officer, Major Thomas Chun, who served as liaison between the participating nations. It was Chun who had arranged today's demonstration, who had pulled strings and called in favors to bring a civilian to a classified military exercise. His fellow officers had questioned his judgment. A movie star? An actor? What could a man who pretended to fight on camera possibly teach soldiers who fought for real? Chun had simply smiled and said, "Wait, just wait." The black car that pulled onto the parade ground was modest, unremarkable, the kind of vehicle that would disappear in any city in Asia. But when the door opened and the passenger stepped out, something shifted in the atmosphere. It was subtle, impossible to define, but every soldier in that formation felt it. A change in pressure, perhaps. Premonition. Bruce Lee was smaller than they expected. That was always the first surprise for people meeting him in person. On screen, he seemed to fill the frame with presence and power. In reality, he stood 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed perhaps 130 pounds. His black shirt was simple, unadorned. His dark pants were loose enough to allow movement but not so loose as to catch or tangle. He wore no jewelry, no symbols of status or achievement. He looked like a man who had come to work. But his eyes, those eyes swept across the formation with an intensity that made hardened killers look away. There was no aggression in that gaze, no challenge, no threat. There was something worse. There was assessment, calculation, the look of a predator who has already determined exactly how every confrontation in this space would end. Have you ever met someone like that? Someone whose physical presence seemed to rewrite the rules of the room they entered? Someone who made you suddenly aware of your own body, your own limitations, your own mortality? Hold that feeling. Remember it. Because that is what 1,000 elite soldiers felt as Bruce Lee walked toward them across the packed earth of the parade ground. Colonel Delgado stepped forward to meet him, extending his hand with the practiced courtesy of a career officer. Mr. Lee, thank you for coming. I admit, when Major Chun proposed this demonstration, I had my doubts. My men are not easily impressed. Bruce shook his hand, and those watching noticed that the colonel's expression flickered slightly. Something in the grip, perhaps. Something that communicated more than words could. I am not here to impress anyone, Bruce said, and his voice carried clearly across the silent parade ground despite its conversational volume. I am here because Major Chun believes I have something to teach. Whether that is true or not, your men will decide for themselves. Delgado nodded slowly. Very well. What do you need? Bruce looked out across the sea of faces, the 1,000 soldiers standing at attention in the morning heat. His gaze seemed to touch each of them individually, to acknowledge their training and their experience and their skepticism. I need a volunteer, he said. Someone who represents the best of what you train here. The fastest, the most skilled, the most confident in close combat. I want to show your men something about speed, and I need an opponent who believes he understands what speed means. A murmur ran through the formation. Soldiers exchanged glances, some eager, some wary. This was not what they had expected. They had anticipated a demonstration, a performance, choreographed movements that looked impressive but proved nothing. Instead, this small man was asking to face their best fighter. Colonel Delgado turned to the formation and raised his voice. Sergeant Major Reyes, step forward. The man who emerged from the ranks was built like a weapon. He stood over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that strained the fabric of his uniform and hands that looked capable of crushing stone. Miguel Reyes was a legend in Philippine Special Forces, a man who had won every combatives tournament he had entered, who had killed enemy soldiers with those massive hands in at least a dozen documented engagements. He moved with the easy confidence of an apex predator, and when he stopped in front of Bruce Lee, the size difference was almost comical. I want you to see this moment clearly. Imagine standing in that formation, watching the largest and most dangerous man you know face off against someone who looks like he could be blown away by a strong wind. Imagine the certainty you would feel about how this was going to end. Imagine the whispers running through the ranks, the suppressed smiles, the shared conviction that this movie star was about to learn a painful lesson about the difference between cinema and reality. Remember that feeling, because you are about to watch it shatter. Reyes saluted the colonel, then turned to face Bruce Lee. His expression was carefully neutral, professionally respectful, but his eyes held the barely concealed anticipation of a cat watching a mouse. Mr. Lee, he said, his voice deep and resonant. It is an honor. I have seen your films. Very entertaining. The word entertaining hung in the air, weighted with condescension. Bruce simply nodded, seemingly unaware of the insult embedded in the compliment. Sergeant Major Reyes, Bruce said, I am told you are the best hand-to-hand fighter in this exercise. Is that true? Reyes allowed himself a small smile. I have not lost a match in 11 years, sir. In training or in combat. Impressive. Then you are exactly who I need. Bruce took a step back, creating space between them. I want to demonstrate something to your fellow soldiers. Something about the nature of speed in combat. You believe your military training has made you fast. I want to show everyone here what fast actually means. The smile faded from Reyes's face. What did you have in mind? Something simple. I will stand here exactly where I am now. You will try to hit me. Not a killing blow, just a touch. Hand, fist, elbow, any part of your body. Anywhere on my body. I will not move my feet from this spot. I will only use my hands to redirect your attacks. We will continue for 12 seconds. If you touch me even once in those 12 seconds, I will acknowledge that military training produces superior fighters, and I will leave this base immediately. The murmur that ran through the formation was louder now. This was not a demonstration. This was a challenge. This small man was betting his reputation against the best fighter they had. And if I cannot touch you? Reyes asked, his voice tight. Then I will have taught these soldiers something valuable. And you will have learned something too. Here is what I want you to do right now. I want you to pause for just a moment and make a prediction. Based on what you know about Bruce Lee, based on what you know about elite military combatives training, what do you think is going to happen? Who would you bet on? The legend who moves like lightning in films, or the career soldier who has killed men with his bare hands? Hold your prediction. Let us see if you are right. Colonel Delgado looked between the two men, his expression unreadable. Whatever doubts he might have had about this demonstration, he was too professional to voice them. He simply nodded and stepped back. Whenever you are ready, Sergeant Major. Reyes settled into a fighting stance, his weight balanced, his hands raised. He had fought hundreds of opponents in his career, had learned to read bodies the way scholars read books. He studied Bruce Lee's posture, looking for weaknesses, for openings, for the inevitable gaps that every fighter displayed. He found nothing. The small man stood with an almost casual relaxation, his hands at his sides, his weight evenly distributed. There was no tension to read, no tells to exploit. It was like trying to find handholds on a smooth wall. Fine, Reyes thought. Let us see how relaxed he stays when I start moving. He exploded forward with the speed that had made him a legend. His right hand shot toward Bruce's chest in a palm strike that had cracked ribs and stopped hearts. It was not his fastest technique, but it was his most reliable, the attack he used to establish dominance at the start of every fight. His palm found empty air. Bruce had not seemed to move. His feet were still planted in exactly the same position. But somehow his torso had shifted just enough that the strike passed within an inch of his chest without making contact. And before Reyes could process this impossibility, something tapped lightly against his wrist. Not a strike, just a touch. A gentle reminder that while Reyes had been attacking, Bruce's hand had traveled to a position that could have destroyed his arm. The formation was silent. Not a whisper, not a breath. 1,000 men watched with the intensity of witnesses to a miracle. 2 seconds. Reyes reset and attacked again. Faster this time, a combination he had drilled 10,000 times. Left jab, right cross, left hook. 3 attacks in less than a second, each one capable of rendering a man unconscious. His instructors had clocked this combination at a speed that the human eye could barely follow. None of them landed. Bruce flowed around each strike like water around stones. His upper body wove and dipped with an economy of movement that seemed almost lazy, each deflection traveling just far enough to redirect the attack and no further. And each time Reyes's strikes found nothing, he felt those light touches on his wrists, his elbows, his shoulders. Reminders, lessons, proof that while he was swinging at shadows, Bruce could have been dismantling him joint by joint. For seconds, now Reyes abandoned technique entirely. He had fought in jungles and alleys, in situations where the Marquis of Queensberry rules did not apply. He threw a knee strike toward Bruce's midsection, followed by an elbow, followed by a headbutt. He used every dirty trick in his considerable arsenal, every attack that had ended fights against opponents who thought they were too skilled to be beaten by crude tactics. None of them came within 3 inches of their target. 7 seconds. Something was breaking inside Miguel Reyes. Not his body that was unharmed. His understanding. His identity. For 11 years, he had known exactly who he was. The best fighter in any room he entered. That certainty had been the foundation of his confidence, his authority, his sense of self. And now a man who weighed 50 pounds less than him was making him look like a child swinging at his father. If you have ever experienced this kind of paradigm shift, you know how disorienting it is. The moment when something you were absolutely certain about is revealed to be false. The ground disappears beneath your feet. Everything you thought you knew becomes questionable. It is terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Reyes felt all of this in the space of seconds. And then something remarkable happened. He stopped. He stopped attacking, stopped trying to prove himself, stopped fighting against the impossible. He stood there, chest heaving, sweat pouring down his face, and he looked at Bruce Lee with new eyes. Not the eyes of a competitor, the eyes of a student. "How?" he breathed. "How are you doing this?" 9 seconds remained on the clock. Bruce could have let them run out, could have completed his demonstration in silence and walked away with his point proven. Instead, he did something that no one expected. He answered. "You are fast," Bruce said, and his voice was gentle now, instructive rather than challenging. "Your hands move faster than 99% of the humans on this planet. Your training has been excellent. Your technique is nearly flawless." He paused, letting the praise land before delivering its counterweight. "But you have been taught to move. You have not been taught to see." The silence in the parade ground was absolute. 1,000 soldiers leaned forward, straining to hear every word. When you attack, your body sends signals before your limbs move. Your shoulders shift. Your eyes focus on your target. Your weight transfers. These signals are small, measured in millimeters and milliseconds. But they exist. And if you learn to read them, you can know what attack is coming before it begins. Bruce tapped his temple. The fight happens here first. Always. The body is just following orders from the mind. I am not faster than your strikes. I am faster than your decisions. If this is touching something in you, if you are feeling the weight of this moment and what it meant to those soldiers, then take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because what happens next changed how an entire generation of Special Forces soldiers thought about combat. Colonel Delgado stepped forward. His face had undergone a transformation in the last 12 seconds. The skepticism was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like hunger. "Mr. Lee," he said, and his voice was rougher than before, stripped of its professional polish. "What you just demonstrated, can it be taught?" Bruce turned to face him. "Everything can be taught. The question is whether it can be learned. This kind of perception requires years of dedicated practice. It requires a complete restructuring of how you think about combat. Most people are not willing to do that work. They want techniques they can memorize, combinations they can drill, physical skills they can measure. What I am talking about cannot be measured. It can only be experienced. But it can be taught," Delgado pressed. "If someone were willing to do the work." Bruce was silent for a moment, studying the colonel with that penetrating gaze. Then he looked out at the formation again, at the 1,000 soldiers who stood in stunned silence, their understanding of combat forever altered. "I have 6 hours before I must leave," Bruce said finally. "I will teach what I can in that time. Not the full system that takes years, but the foundations, the beginning of perception, how to quiet your own mind so you can hear your opponent's intentions." He smiled slightly. "Whether it helps your soldiers survive, that is up to them." What followed was unlike any training session those soldiers had ever experienced. Bruce began not with techniques but with stillness. He had them stand in silence, breathing slowly, learning to quiet the constant chatter of their minds. He explained that a turbulent mind was like turbulent water, impossible to see through clearly. "Your thoughts create noise," he told them, walking among the ranks like a teacher in a classroom of giants. "Every worry, every plan, every expectation, all of it is static that blocks your perception. You cannot hear your opponent's intentions if your own mind is screaming." He taught them exercises for developing peripheral awareness, for expanding their field of perception beyond the narrow focus that combat training typically instilled. He had them work in pairs, one partner moving slowly while the other tried to sense the direction of movement with their eyes closed. "Do not guess," he instructed. "Do not think. Feel. Your body knows things your conscious mind does not. Learn to listen to it. The skeptics among them, and there were many, found their skepticism eroding with each passing hour. Bruce moved among them constantly, adjusting postures, correcting errors, demonstrating concepts with his own body. And occasionally, when a soldier showed particular potential or particular resistance, Bruce would face them directly and demonstrate what perception could do. Each time, the result was the same. Soldiers who had never been touched in sparring found themselves unable to lay a finger on this small man. Fighters who had won championships and survived wars discovered that their speed and power meant nothing against someone who knew what they were going to do before they did it. Let me ask you something now. Something personal. Have you ever had an experience where your understanding of what was possible completely changed? A moment where something you saw or heard or felt made you realize that the limits you had accepted were illusions. I want you to think about that experience. Hold it in your mind, because that is what 1,000 soldiers felt that day in Fort Magsaysay. As the afternoon wore on and the 6 hours approached their end, something remarkable happened. The soldiers stopped trying to defeat Bruce and started trying to learn from him. The competitive energy that defined military culture transformed into something closer to reverence. These were men who had been taught to believe that force and speed and aggression were the ultimate virtues in combat. And they were discovering that there was another level entirely, a level where force was redirected, speed was anticipated, and aggression was turned against itself. Sergeant Major Reyes, the man who had not lost a match in 11 years, became Bruce's most devoted student in those few hours. He followed every instruction with fierce concentration, asked questions that revealed genuine understanding, practiced the exercises with the intensity of a man who had just discovered that everything he knew was incomplete. During a brief break, he approached Bruce with a request. "Mr. Lee," he said, and his voice held none of the condescension from their first meeting. "I must ask, why come here? You are famous. You are wealthy. You could be anywhere in the world. Why spend a day teaching soldiers in the Philippines?" Bruce was quiet for a moment, watching the soldiers practice the perception exercises he had taught them. When he spoke, his voice was softer than it had been during the instruction. "When I was young, everyone told me what I could not be. I was too small. I was Chinese in a world that did not value Chinese. I came from a poor colony to a rich country that did not want me. Every door I tried to open was closed in my face." He turned to look at Reyes directly. "But I had teachers who believed in me when no one else did, who gave me their time and their knowledge freely, asking nothing in return. They changed my life. They made me who I am." He gestured at the soldiers spread across the parade ground. "These men protect their countries. They risk their lives so others can be safe. If something I can teach helps even one of them survive a fight they would have lost, then this day has been worth more than any film I could make." Reyes bowed his head, a gesture of respect that transcended military protocol. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." The sun was beginning to set when Bruce finally prepared to leave. The parade ground was bathed in golden light, the same color as the morning but softer now, gentler. The 1,000 soldiers stood in formation once more, but everything had changed. They stood differently. They breathed differently. Something in their eyes had shifted from the certainty of men who knew everything to the openness of students who understood how much they had yet to learn. Colonel Delgado walked Bruce to his waiting car. The two men had spoken extensively throughout the day, finding unexpected common ground in their philosophies of combat and leadership. "What you have given my men today," Delgado said, "cannot be repaid. I have trained soldiers for 30 years. I thought I understood what was possible in hand-to-hand combat. You have shown me I was barely scratching the surface." Bruce shook his hand, and this time Delgado was prepared for the unexpected strength in that grip. "I have given them a beginning," Bruce said. "Only a beginning. The real work is theirs. Whether they continue to develop what they learned today, or let it fade and return to their old patterns, that is their choice. I hope they choose to continue. I hope something I said or showed will stay with them and grow." He paused at the car door, turning to look back at the formation one last time. The soldiers stood at attention, but there was no stiffness in their posture now. They watched him with eyes that held something more than respect, something closer to gratitude. "Sergeant Major Reyes," Bruce called out. Reyes stepped forward from the formation, surprised to be singled out. Bruce reached into his pocket and withdrew something small. He walked back to Reyes and pressed it into his palm. It was a metal medallion, worn smooth with handling, inscribed with Chinese characters. "This was given to me by my teacher," Bruce said. "He told me it carried an instruction that every martial artist must learn. The characters say, 'Empty your cup.' Do you understand what that means?" Reyes looked at the medallion, then back at Bruce. "I think so. It means to let go of what you think you know, to make space for new learning." Bruce smiled, and there was genuine warmth in it. "You understand perfectly. Your cup was full this morning. You thought you knew what combat was. Now your cup is empty. Now you can fill it with something new." He clasped Reyes's shoulder briefly. "Keep emptying it. Every time you think you have learned everything, empty it again. That is the only way to keep growing." He turned and walked to the car without looking back. The engine started. The vehicle pulled away, disappearing down the road that led off the base. And 1,000 soldiers stood in the fading light, each of them holding something they had not possessed that morning. Not techniques, not combinations, something harder to define and infinitely more valuable. A glimpse of what was possible, a crack in the walls of their limitations, a memory of a small man who had done impossible things and then patiently explained how they could learn to do them too. If you have stayed with me this far, if you have felt the heat of that parade ground and the transformation of those soldiers, then please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to continue telling these stories, honoring these legends, keeping their teachings alive for new generations. The years that followed scattered those soldiers across the globe. They returned to their respective countries, their respective units, their respective wars. Many of them saw combat again. Some did not survive. But those who did carried something with them that could not be taken away. The perception exercises Bruce had taught them became standard training in several special forces units. The philosophy he had shared, about quieting the mind and reading intentions, was incorporated into combatives programs from Manila to Washington. His influence spread like ripples from a stone dropped in still water, touching people who had never heard his name and never would. Sergeant Major Reyes became an instructor himself after leaving active service. He taught at the Philippine Military Academy for 15 years, passing on everything he had learned from Bruce Lee and everything he had developed in the decades since. The medallion never left his pocket. He showed it to every new class of cadets, telling them the story of the day his cup was emptied. "There was a man," he would say, his voice roughened by age but still powerful, "who showed me that everything I believed about fighting was incomplete. He was smaller than any of you. He looked like a strong wind would knock him over. And he made me, the best fighter in the Philippine military, look like I was moving in slow motion." The cadets would laugh nervously, unable to reconcile this story with the imposing figure before them. "I am not telling you this to impress you," Reyes would continue. "I am telling you so you understand something crucial. No matter how good you become, no matter how many fights you win, there is always another level. Always. The moment you believe you have nothing left to learn, you have begun to die. Keep your cup empty. Keep making space for what you do not yet know." He would hold up the medallion then, letting the light catch its worn surface. "This was given to me by Bruce Lee himself. He told me to keep emptying my cup. I have tried to follow that instruction for 50 years. Some days I succeed. Some days I fill up with pride or certainty and have to empty myself again. But I never stop trying. And neither should you." Those cadets went on to become soldiers, then officers, then instructors themselves. And they carried the story with them, each retelling adding new details, new emphases, new interpretations. The legend grew. The truth at its core remained constant. One of those cadets, a young woman named Maria Santos, would eventually rise to become a general, the first female general in Philippine Special Forces history. In interviews, she credited her success to many factors: talent, hard work, mentors who believed in her. But she always ended with the same story. When I was a cadet, an old instructor named Reyes told us about the time Bruce Lee came to Fort Magsaysay. He showed us a medallion and told us to keep our cups empty. I did not fully understand what he meant at the time, but I kept trying to understand. And eventually, I realized that the instruction was not just about martial arts. It was about life, about leadership, about being willing to let go of what you think you know so you can learn what you need to know. She would smile then, a smile that held decades of hard-won wisdom. I never met Bruce Lee. He died before I was born. But his teaching reached me through a chain of students and instructors stretching back to a single day in 1971. That is the power of a great teacher. They do not just change the people they teach directly. They change everyone those people will ever teach. They send ripples through time. The parade ground at Fort Magsaysay looks different now. Buildings have been added and removed. Trees have grown. The exact spot where Bruce Lee stood and made 1,000 soldiers go silent cannot be precisely identified. But there is a small memorial near the main training facility. It was erected in 2003, on the 30th anniversary of Bruce Lee's death. The memorial is modest, just a plaque and a stone bench. The plaque contains a quote, "Empty your cup so that it may be filled. Become devoid to gain totality." Beneath it, smaller text explains the significance of the site, the legendary demonstration that took place there, the teaching that spread through military communities around the world. Soldiers stop at this memorial before and after training. Some sit on the bench in silence, trying to empty their minds the way Bruce taught. Others touch the plaque briefly, a gesture of respect and connection. None of them were there in 1971. All of them have been shaped by what happened there. I want to ask you one more question before we end. A question I hope you will answer honestly, if only to yourself. What would you have seen if you had been standing in that formation? If you had watched a small man make your best fighter look helpless? If you had spent 6 hours learning principles that contradicted everything you had been taught? Would your cup have emptied? Would you have made space for something new? Or would you have clung to what you knew, dismissing what you saw as tricks and illusions, protecting your certainty at the cost of your growth? There is no shame in the honest answer. Most of us cling. Most of us protect what we think we know. It is human nature to resist having our foundations shaken. But the soldiers who grew the most from that day were the ones who let go, who allowed their understanding to be destroyed so it could be rebuilt stronger. That is the invitation this story offers. Not to believe in Bruce Lee, or to accept this particular narrative as historical fact, but to ask yourself, where are you clinging? What certainty are you protecting? What cup needs to be emptied so you can fill it with something new? The sun is setting on the parade ground at Fort Magsaysay. The soldiers have gone. The demonstration has ended. The legendary martial artist has driven away into the fading light. But his teaching remains, carried forward by everyone who heard it and everyone they will ever teach. Empty your cup. Keep emptying it. That is the only way to keep growing. Thank you for watching. Thank you for allowing me to share this vision with you, this imagined encounter that carries real truth at its heart. If this story has meant something to you, please subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. And share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone whose cup might be too full, someone who might be ready to let go and begin again. Because we are all students, every one of us. No matter how much we have learned, no matter how many victories we have won, there is always another level. Always another teacher waiting to show us what we do not yet know. Bruce Lee understood this. He never stopped learning, never stopped questioning, never stopped emptying his own cup. And that is why his legend continues to grow, why his teaching continues to spread, why a story about a single day at a military base can still touch hearts more than 50 years later. Empty your cup, my friends, and be ready to be filled.